let's ask the head teacher of Passmore's Academy, Vic Goddard. Hello, Vic. Thanks for joining me this evening.
Nice to see you again.
Good to have you on the show. So I'm assuming that with a fine-tooth comb, you have carefully sifted through all these education-related WhatsApp messages, as I've had to do because it's my job. I hope you've done at least a noble attempt at it. Tell me what you make of this, what you make of the attitude of the then Education Secretary to teachers, what do you make of the reasons or lack of reasons whereby schools were shut down and pupils made to stay at home. I mean, the kind of ramifications of this are profound and manifold, and absolutely pertain to what you were and weren't doing and the legacy for children and for teachers now. So you take it away, Vic. You go any way you like with this one. It's your story, really, isn't it?
Yeah. It made me sick. It made me feel physically sick when I read that, because this is really personal, right? And I will keep it together. But I lost a really dear friend who happened to be our caretaker during lockdown. And I was making, because of COVID, I was making decisions along with colleagues based on what I presume was good, factual, evidence-based advice that was coming out from the government. Yeah. And I had to rely on that. Whether it was a popular decision or an unpopular decision, I had to rely on that. Yes. As much, I'm not Sir Chris Whitty. I'm not an expert. I'm a PE teacher. So I needed that, and I made those decisions and fought that corner with, my community was very divided, pro and anti-lockdown, pro and anti-vax, etc. And so I relied on that to make the right decision to keep my community safe. And I'm not just talking about the teachers in the school and the children in the school. I'm talking about their gran and granddad who they went home to, and everybody else, or their mum who's got, is in the middle of chemotherapy or whatever it might be. And I relied on them to make serious big boy decisions with big boy pants on. Yeah. And what it feels like from reading those is a load of point scoring silliness that's about ego and political will rather than doing the right thing. Now, don't get me wrong, it was very hard in the pandemic. They were doing things for the first time. I get that. Yeah. But what then gave them the right to be arrogant enough to ignore that advice? So I live every day with the decisions I made. If I'd made different ones, would my friend still be alive? I live with that every day. I live with that when I see his wife working at my school and I see his children. And I made those decisions based on what I thought was the right thing to do.
What do you mean, Vic? I would have thought that the thing that you would have been feeling was that you were made to respond in, let's put it this way, too dramatic a way, that you were forced to lock your school down, shut the children out, shut the caretaker out. I would have thought that you would have felt that the decisions that you made would have probably saved the life of your caretaker, not have contributed to... You don't...
But I have no faith now, Vanessa. This whole tranche of information that you haven't yet seen. No, was the lockdown right? Was it not right? Was it the right time? Should we have come back earlier? All those things that I had to put some faith in people to make those decisions and to give me the right guidance. I don't know whether any of that guidance was now right. I don't know if any of that guidance was about saying, I want to hit my target, so please can I, speak to George Osborne, or I want to, I don't think this is the right thing to do. I don't care what you think. This should be a decision based on facts, science and evidence. That's what they trust the science, as we were told.
When it was going on and you were trusting that the government was trusting the science, and why wouldn't you? We were told every single day we're following the science. I questioned it at the time because I just, as an adult, know perfectly well there's no such thing as the science. It doesn't exist. There are many, many, many different scientists, all with different views, and there's lots and lots of evidence that can effectively be made to prove and show pretty much anything you wanted to prove and show. So I was always very worried by what I thought, personally, this is my personal view, the patronising concept of following the science. I didn't believe in it. I didn't think there is such a thing as the science, and I found it very worrying that we were being told that. But I suppose what I thought it meant was we're following the best of the science, or we're following the best scientists here, Professor Chris Whitty, Sir Patrick Vallance. We're following them. We've chosen them to be the best, and what they say is the right advice. That's the advice that we are taking. Look, here they are on this podium. Here's Boris Johnson on this podium. There's Matt Hancock. There's Chris Whitty. We're doing what they tell us to do, and therefore in their safe hands we can keep you as safe as we can. at the time, when you were told that your school had to go into lockdown and the pupils, except for the children of key workers, must go home and must not come into school at all, how did you feel about it? Did you think, well, it probably is the safest thing in a pandemic just to keep us physically away from one another? We don't know if children are super spreaders or not. There are many teachers who have various different health conditions. This is probably the wisest and safest thing. I'm sure it's the best idea. Or did you have very different responses as a person, as a head teacher to this? Were you worried about it?
I guess every school was in a different position because obviously at that time COVID was quite regional and it was bigger in some areas.
Yes.
Harlem happened to be very high. Yeah. So the school where the school is happened to be very high. So I already had 40, 50, 45% of teachers off. I had 30% of students off already with COVID, but we didn't know, we weren't really on top of that. Yeah. And so for me, it felt like an inevitability at the time, if I'm honest. So it wasn't something I went, oh, why are they doing that? I could see what was happening around me already. Right. I guess the thing that I wanted to question in my mind was, and how serious is it, and what does it lead to? We've already had, I think one of the comments Boris said is you're more likely to die falling down the stairs than you were to catch COVID as an old person. I think that's one of his comments. Okay, if that's the case, then again, I would hope that the experts have put the best evidence out there and the right choices are made. And all this has done is just undermined my faith in almost every decision we made in that process. Did we ever make the right decision based on the best evidence? Because it doesn't feel like it. It feels like who could shout the loudest, or what they thought as an individual. Now, don't get me wrong, Vanessa, I'm sure you're probably right. I'm sure I'm probably right in some things, but I don't know everything, and I certainly didn't know everything then. No. And I was relying on them.
What about the part where they couldn't really stop our children in England, at any rate? So I live in England, talking about England, from wearing masks, because Nicola Sturgeon had already put Scottish children in masks, and they didn't really fancy the argy-bargy. So, and I think I'm praising it pretty accurately, aren't I? And that's why. So, because Nicola Sturgeon was quite tough to tackle, all our little children had to wear masks at school. Yeah. And it was inflicted upon them, and that's the reason why. Not because of the science, not because there's any empirical evidence to show it was a good idea, but because Nicola Sturgeon's a toughie, and they didn't fancy grappling with her. What do you think of that, for example?
It became a joke, if I'm honest, because we all knew. Okay, so they've announced there's an announcement tomorrow. We knew that Nicola Sturgeon would do it the day before, so we knew what was coming. I mean, literally, Nicola Sturgeon became our weather vane for what's coming to us. And once again, that was about political gain, not about anything else. It wasn't about making the right decision. It was about what's the most politically expedient decision for me to make. Yeah. And that's what now the flavour feels like. That every decision was about politics, not about saving lives or evidence. Or I'm struggling with this government anyway as a teacher, as you can imagine. Yeah. All it does is rips out any confidence that I had that I made the right decisions. Now, don't get me wrong, I made decisions based on what I had in front of me, but it still, people still died, people in my community died. 19 young people lost parents or grandparents. Yes. And
actually, I find that even though this was so recent, talking about it feels like some kind of telescopic kind of odyssey back into the past in this very weird way, doesn't it? So, for example, when you're looking at the rule of 6, that seemed to have been conjured up pretty much out of thin air, but tortured entire families where grandparents had to stay outside the garden and couldn't get in a car, and you couldn't, it was a colossally big deal, wasn't it, this rule of 6 at the time? And some people listening and watching will have simply broken it. They would have thought, well, this doesn't work for us and our family, I'm not taking any notice. And other people will have reported their neighbours for breaking it, and, because they thought they might kill them if they had 7 people instead of 8 people. And remember the whole thing about, don't kill your granny for Christmas. Don't have your granny over, because if you do, you might kill her, and all of that. I mean, it was so frightening at the time, wasn't it? And such a responsibility for everyone. But when you look at that rule of 6 and the fact that it was imposed on people, and it doesn't seem to have been justified by the science or any science at all, really. I mean, what do you think of that?
I think what was a divided country already. We had a Brexit vote, etc. This just felt like it drove a massive sort of chasm between so many factions of our community, you know, and I always wanted to go back to saying, look, this is the evidence I've got. This is why we've made the decision, and I can then justify it from that. Now those families have got every right to come back to us and to the government and go, hold on, where does that come from? You know, whatever faith we have in the professionals to make the decisions, well, that faith's gone. I look at that, you know, going to funerals, not going to funerals, some of those things that were missed that maybe didn't need to be missed. I mean, it's unforgivable, Vanessa. I think that's the only word I can use.
Let me ask you one final question, Vic, if you don't mind. So we've heard a lot about the effect of lockdown on children, haven't we? Particularly very little ones whose social development has been extremely hindered by this, and many children who suffered very badly in lockdown from all sorts of things, neglect, abuse, God knows what, and how difficult it was for parents, especially working parents, especially people in very enclosed spaces, especially people who had a disabled family member that they had to look after and work and look after children. I mean, it was for some people it was absolute hell, quite frankly, hell on earth, and very often the people who suffered the worst were the children. So and so when you look back now and you look at the children in your care now, the children you're educating, can you see the effect of lockdown on them still? Is it still setting them back?
Yeah, oh, definitely. You started off with social interaction. I think we underestimate what a year an 11-year-old learns in those last 2 years of primary school.
Yes.
You know, year groups lost that last year. And reality is they become the big people in the school. They get responsibility. They grow up a bit. They mature. Their relationships with the teachers mature and the other students mature. That hadn't happened. So we see year sevens coming through who still have those edges on them. They still have that immaturity about them that would have gone through primary school, you know, would have gone through their opportunity to go on their residential. You know, the social interaction aspect of being a young person now has been affected. And I think, you know, moving forward into these young people becoming adolescents and young adults, you know, I worry about their resilience. I worry about the effect that's going to have on them as a working adult, where sometimes you just got to get on with it. Do you know what I mean? I do. I worry that's just not an effect now. You know, we'll catch up their English and maths, of course we will, but that socialisation that they get naturally through school, well, when will they ever catch that up again? Will they ever catch it? Will they always be that little bit immature, that little bit rough around the edges because they haven't been through those experiences that we all had as rites of passage? So the world is quicker to anger. These young people's communications around sort of anything that they don't agree with is incredibly difficult, you know, and I think we see that in the adults as well. This is the least fun the job has been outside of COVID.
Really?
It's purely, it's because the world is quick to anger, and as much as you try to make decisions, you know, I've served my Harlow community for over 20 years, and every decision I make is in their best interest as far as I'm concerned. But, you know, that faith that the community has in us and that we have in them, it is tested when, you know, you're put at war with each other, which is it feels like we were put at war with some of our community without any evidence to do so.
Vic Goddard, always a privilege to have you on the programme, and I'm very sorry to hear you sounding disillusioned. He's a very passionate educator, and normally I would say much more upbeat than that.